What is the worst workplace screw-up you've ever witnessed? When I worked at Home Depot, we had a guy who was really something special. When driving a forklift during store hours, you're supposed to have a spotter with flags guide you through the store. It's pretty much an instant firing if you don't. So anyways, this guy drives the forklift into the store with a pallet of cinder blocks and no spotter. He proceeds to hit a shelf, which damages a cinder block on the bottom. He panics, realizing he damaged a $1 cinder block, and speeds through the store on the forklift, weaving in and out of customers, and gets caught by the manager trying to dump the entire pallet of blocks down the garbage chute to cover his tracks. That was his last day. Story 2. Not a horrifying story, but it happened this week. My company rented out a theater for the premiere of Star Wars, The Last Jedi, and we give tickets to our top clients, potential investors, future clients, etc. One of the guys on the sales team lost a bet to his client, so he has to show up wearing a Star Wars costume. We were debating what costume he should buy, so to get another employee's opinion, I forwarded the whole email thread. There were a lot of ducks, holes written into that thread, accompanied by photos of Leia in her bikini. Instead of sending it to Kyle at my company, I forwarded it to Kyle, my next potential customer, who I had not yet met, but was meeting for lunch that day. I sent him a separate email apologizing and explaining, but instead of emailing me back, he responded to the whole thread saying, have him wear a Star Trek outfit with a wand and Gandalf hate. That will confuse the crap out of people. Needless to say, lunch went well. Story 3. I worked in a salmon processing plant in Alaska. There was a dude in his mid-20s who had worked there before, so they assigned him to run the holding tanks. The tanks were 2 huge, like 3-story tall, tanks that stored the fish from the boats. One day, the dude thought he had drained both tanks of all the fish, so they called it a day. We didn't work with fresh fish for 2 days. When we got back, it smelled like death. Turns out he hadn't drained one of the tanks, so the fish sat in lukewarm water for 3 days. He destroyed about 500,000 pounds of salmon. After that, he worked in the gutting section, Story 4. Worked for Walmart for several years. One morning, I smell an electrical fire. We call the fire department. They come in and say it's contained, but we should evacuate the building due to the acrid smoke. Most firemen don't even enter because of the fumes. Management says no. Employees cannot leave. Eventually, we find out one of the deli guys decided to defrost a package of jalapeno poppers. They're to go from freezer directly into fryer. He figured putting the entire package in for 4 hours on the regular high setting would do the trick. We checked. He really did decide it needed 4 hours. This is the same employee that wanted to test that the fryer oil was ready, so he stuck his finger in it. Severe burns ensued. Story 5. Office manager. Visited the office in the middle of the night with 2 escorts, drunk and high. Set off the alarm and got arrested. But the police did not come by the office at 8 in the morning to explain why the door was unlocked. And there were sex toys on 2 of the desks. Ah, good times. Story 6. Worked at Books A Million back in 08. We had this one super lazy worker. Instead of actually cleaning up any misplaced magazines, books, or toys, this guy would throw them into these 2 corners of the store where bookshelves met that would leave a tall, empty hole. Evidently, this guy did it for months because these holes were at least 6 feet tall each, and it got to the point where you could start to see merchandise creeping over the top. Now, I worked as a barista when this was happening, and those corners are on the opposite side of the store. You could see the tops from where the register for the cafe was. One night, our store manager was closing. Now, this guy is an older, bigger fellow who is gay. Imagine my reaction when all I see from the cafe is a ladder being propped next to one of the holes, and this guy climbing all he could. Again, he was a bigger person, so it was a little of a struggle for him to discover almost $20,000 of outdated and damaged merchandise, only to realize there's another one just on the opposite side of the store. Well, let's just say I found every excuse in the book to stay in my little cafe while my manager's mega explosions was happening. I could hear the swear words and feel the rage from where I was. Now, this was all happening while the person who was responsible was not working. He was actually scheduled to work the next day, and let me tell you, I do not believe in ghosts, but I saw the face of one that day. When he walked into the bookstore and saw my manager, the district manager, the ELP team waiting for him while an entire crew of extra employees were cleaning his mess. Well, the guy was taken to the back to be interrogated by LP and the managers. Evidently, he tried to blame the entire thing on me. Was glad that the other store members backed me up and knew who the real a-hole was. Obviously, he was fired before he even entered the store that day. I think they also had a lawsuit filed. Just know that you should always clean up your messes, kids. Story 7. It didn't really cost the company itself much in the end, but we were set to have a huge company dinner to celebrate some safety accomplishment, something like a certain amount of days without an injury. Let me preface this by saying that there was already a ton of ongoing hostility between management and the hourly workers. So much to the point that if it was done outside of the workplace, free meal or not, next to nobody would have shown up. So the plan was to do it after the shift and just have a ton of food and drinks from this really good restaurant buffet style at the building. Well, this is being talked up for like 3 weeks up until the night it actually happens. Lots of, hey, better not call in sick on Friday. You're gonna miss out. Wink, wink, haha, and things like that. Well, Friday finally rolls around. We have a particularly horrible shift just due to it being unexpectedly busy and whatnot, but everybody is staying positive for the most part, because after all, if we just get through the shift, we shall dine like kings. But you get the point. Everybody wraps up and is waiting patiently for this one supervisor to get back with all the food. So we're waiting and waiting and waiting, and he finally shows up. No food. We all start giving him crap, just kind of busting his balls about forgetting the food or whatever and assuming he was coming in to get a cart or something to bring in all the stuff. He walks immediately to our direct manager, kind of whispers something to him, and they both turn around and go upstairs to the office. We wait for like 20 more minutes until people are starting to get pissed. Somebody finally goes up and attempts to go in the office and the door is locked. Weird. A couple minutes later, our manager comes on the loudspeaker and informs us that the company card was lost on the way to get the food, and there was no other way of paying for it, and our dinner was going to have to be postponed to a later date. They didn't even have the duckin' balls to tell us to our faces, or at the very least come out of pocket for some duckin' items off a dollar menu or something. We were all just blue-collar dudes that wouldn't have cared all that much, but the way the management handled it almost set off a full-on riot. Story 8. Worked at Circuit City, circa 2005, installing car audio. One of my coworkers put a satellite radio in a brand new BMW, but apparently wired something wrong and the car burned to the ground. Oops. Story 9. Working as a cashier in a family-owned Dodge dealership a few years ago. The lead detailer was a friend of the owner. Guy's name was Tim. Tim was an older guy, and the owner trusted him enough to give out a set of keys to open the shop. Late one Friday night, Tim decides he really needs to impress a much younger lady, so he borrows a customer's Viper out of the Mechanics Bay area. Date didn't go well, and now he's drunk as duck. He hits something and does a crap ton of damage to the front of the Viper. Tim figures the best thing to do is drive the car back to where it was and clean the crap out of the damaged front, then run away. But Tim didn't realize the owner had installed some cameras in the mechanics area. So when everyone shows up and holy crap, what happened to this customer's supercar? Well, let's roll the tape. And there is Tim, spending hours drunkenly cleaning the front of the Viper in an effort to make it go unnoticed. The car ended up being totaled, but that one section of crumpled up panel was spick and span. They found Tim in another customer's car sleeping it off. Tim didn't end up getting fired until the customer threatened to sue the dealership. It actually got reported to corporate, and FCA had to give the guy a brand new Viper. If the customer hadn't complained to corporate, the dealership owner would have laughed it off. Because old friends, right? Story 10. I used to work in an art gallery right out of college. We had an intern whose name, for the sake of this story, will be Sarah. One day we have one of our regular customers comes in with at least half of his collection. He had a water leak/flood in his house where he stored his art, and the water had gotten to everything on the lower shelves. Among the pieces he brings in is a portfolio series of original Salvador Dali prints. The series is worth around $75,000 and comes in this hard, ornate case and is among the most valuable things in his collection. The water has completely soaked through all the prints and the ink is bleeding everywhere. Being of paramount importance, I place the series on one of the tables we use for appraisal in the back of the gallery while we wait for the insurance people and restoration specialists to show up. The client leaves, assured that we will be in contact as soon as these people show up. About an hour later, Sarah comes in from school and heads to the back where our break room is also situated. Mind you, myself, the gallery owner, and my 2 other associates are all up front working, talking, etc. While back there, she sees this open portfolio of prints and that it's soaking wet, and in what I can only assume was a panic move. She dropped to bags and began trying to separate the prints, not knowing what they are. This is a huge no. The prints were wet, yes, but had begun to dry out, and we're at that stage where the paper is all stuck together. One by one, she peeled prints apart, ripping the artwork off the front of most of them, and in a few instances tearing holes in them. After doing all this, she comes to the front with a bit of a concerned look on her face and tells the owner, who was talking to me at the time, that somehow the pieces we had out for appraisal had gotten wet, and that she peeled them apart so that they wouldn't become more damaged. I've never seen someone's face drop and go that pale so quickly. The owner didn't say a word. She just sprinted to the back and then let out a scream akin to someone about to be murdered. I ran to the back after her and found her standing over the prints having a panic attack. My 2 other colleagues followed soon after with Sarah to see what was happening. As soon as Sarah walked into the room, the owner screamed at her to get out and never come back. Sarah, being confused, started mumbling about not understanding, and the owner erupted further. I grabbed Sarah's things off the ground, threw my arm over her shoulder, and walked her away and out of the gallery, explaining what she had done. Unsurprisingly, she was mortified and began crying inconsolably. The owner ended up having to pay the cost of restoration, which was not cheap, and the client never bought from us again. Story 11. Old boss was the most charismatic mother ducker you've ever met. Unfortunately, that charisma was a cover for the fact that he didn't really know what he was doing. As part of the process for transplanting a huge tree on an embankment, our company hired a very small crane outfit to lift the thing for us. By small, I mean the company was basically one guy and a rigger, not that the crane itself was small. Think the fact that this guy was hurting for business led to him to allow the bossman to convince him to lift the tree on a day where the wind was way above the safe levels. After agreeing that conditions were unsafe, the majority of our crew had packed up and moved across the site to work on other stuff. Bossman sneakily grabbed a couple new guys who didn't know any better and got the crane operator to lift the tree. Wind picked up and pulled the crane down the hill. Tree landed on top of it. Rest of the crew rushes back on site in time to witness the bossman trying to cut his way to the crane operator with a chainsaw. He makes an ill-advised cut on a branch under tension, which snaps back and clocks him in the head. Bossman ends up in a coma for a couple weeks. Crane operator was already passed. Company downplayed the duckery of the incident, shifted the focus to bossman's heroic efforts to save the crane operator. Crane operator got a nice bench and a 4x6-inch plaque, and I'm sure his family got paid too. This is why there is so much red tape on modern job sites. Story 12. My first job was at a fast food restaurant working the grill. We got an order for mozzarella sticks, which are always cooked fresh when ordered, and the guy running the fryer dutifully dumped a batch in the basket and put it in the oil. Timer goes off, dude pulls the basket and dumps the cheese sticks in the fries basket per protocol, but one remains stuck to the basket as he puts it back in. Guy realizes this is his mistake. He has to get that last cheese stick out of there. So what does he do? Does he lift the basket back out of the 200-degree Fahrenheit oil? Bruh, he just duck and sticks his hand in there. Thankfully, he was quickly shown the error of his ways and only burned the crap out of his fingertips. Story 13. I had an employee who was working night audit, hotel. I was a GM, so he called me when I was on call and told me that a guest complained about water dripping from the ceiling in his room on the first floor. Did you go up to check on the room above it? No. How long ago was this? Like a couple hours ago. I've never flown out of bed faster. I threw on some clothes and made it to the hotel in record time. By the time I got to the second floor, I could hear a waterfall. The source of the water was, in fact, not the second floor, nor was it the third floor. No, it was the fourth floor. We had the water shut off earlier in the day for work that was being done on the pipes. A guest got pissed and checked out because it took too long for the water to come back on. Apparently, they had tried to turn on the bath and didn't think to ducking turn it off. So the bathtub overflowed for God knows how long, flooded the room, and the room underneath it, and the room underneath that, and finally the room underneath that. As it turns out, my idiot employee had moved someone from the room on the third floor for the same thing, but didn't think to check on it. Instead, he decided to call me when a second guest, now on the first floor, complained of the same thing. Thousands and thousands of dollars of damage. Story 14. My own git. Crawling around in someone's attic above their garage, foot slipped off of one of the trusses and onto the sheetrock ceiling. Tried to correct my balance. My hand that was holding up most of my weight slipped, so all my weight went onto the sheetrock. Rather than just my foot going through and making a foot-sized hole, nearly an entire section of sheetrock came down. A large section of it landed on top of the customer's car. It didn't do too much damage and was more embarrassing than anything. The customer was actually really cool about it, and most of all, just wanted to make sure I was okay, which, for the most part, I was. I managed to catch myself on one of the trusses with my ribs taking the brunt of the fall, but could have been much worse. Another one was my poor dad. He was replacing a water heater that was located on the second floor of a home, and in the midst of trying to disconnect the cold water feed, the crafty PVC/valve demanded to shatter. Obviously, pressurized water started shooting out of it, so he plugged it with his finger the best he could. But it wasn't a clean break, so that was difficult. In a best-case scenario, you'd have a helper or a homeowner there to shut the main water supply off, maybe. But the homeowner wasn't home, and his helper ran to grab parts or something. Nor did he have a fitting that he could use to stop the flow. His phone was out in the truck, so calling someone was out of the question. He held his thumb over that pipe like a Dutch boy with his finger in a dam for upwards of 15 minutes, with water spraying all over him, all of the ducking place, and with no idea when he'd be able to get help. He apparently decided it was best if he attempted to find the water shut-off quickly. So he releases the onslaught of water, runs downstairs and outside looking for the shut-off, but can't find it anywhere, until he realizes a neighbor's car is parked on top of it, and he can't reach it. In an attempt to mitigate the damage, he goes back upstairs and decides to plug the hole with his thumb again as best he can. Homeowner shows up and all hell breaks loose, understandably so. They were eventually able to find the owner of the car and get the water shut off, but by this point, so much water had flooded the upstairs that it had made its way downstairs through the walls and whatnot. I only witnessed this after the fact, but the amount of water that was in that house was impressive, to say the least. I'm not sure what the total damages were because, in a surprising turn of events, our insurance declined a payout because the specific PVC used had been recalled / not to code and / or the original piping was done incorrectly or something. And IRC, another factor was that the homeowner had done the original work themselves, thus making them responsible in that the failure was likely to happen no matter who touched it, I guess. I don't feel too bad for them because ultimately they tried to say all kinds of crap was damaged that absolutely was not. Things that were in rooms / areas not even near any water damage. I won't get into specifics, but rather than expecting to being made whole, they were thinking they were getting a fat payday, and that didn't work out very well for them. It could be argued that my dad might have recognized this and took better precautions, as well as having the tools / materials to stop the flow on hand in case something like that happened. So while he's too prideful to admit he could have probably done things differently, and I do understand the panic that must have been going through his mind at the time, I still consider it a pretty hefty duck-up. Story 15. I asked this question because I just witnessed my own. A guy at work pressed CC instead of BCC on an email and immediately violated 70 to 100 NDAs related to a global, multi-billion-dollar client. The COO got 3 attorneys working on it within 15 minutes. He wasn't supposed to even touch the email. My company has an automated setup where he would just have to press a button. Instead, he copied and pasted the addresses all himself and forgot BCC. This was a super routine reminder. Kuyu had asked him to do this a week prior, but he never did. May have also jeopardized the client's NDAs as well. Our industry is very private about partnerships / business deals. Business practices can easily be guessed based on knowing who else knows the info. Ensuing crap, storm, client contact calling from vacation does not sound pleased. Only saving grace is that they were, until this point, very happy clients that might stop them from suing our asses off. Their partners can still sue for asses though. Not sure if the guy will be fired. Everything to be determined. Story 16. Head of ER who sent nearly every woman complaining of chest pains to psychiatry, hysteria, or anxiety, or if they were unattractive, home after a rough tongue lashing, neurotic, making it up for attention, or wasting my time and hurting your poor, hard-working husband by not being home for him. What kind of monster are you? Most had suffered a heart attack. Some died. All had real, actual medical issues. Duck that guy. Story 17. Well, the worst one was probably my screw-up. I teach kindergarten. I love my little kinders. They are sweet, caring, and impressionable. Someone will start a chant. I hate chanting. We are not in a cult, friends. And they all follow. Just yesterday, 2 of them were saying, hot lunch is better. Hot lunch is better. And all of the children joined in, even the cold lunchers. So anywho, I'm teaching these kiddos about needs and wants. What are things we need to live and what are things we want? And this is probably day 4 of talking about this, so I was ready to wrap it up. I was looking on YouTube for a video and I see The Giving Tree by Shel Silverstein. I click it and start listening, and it's following the book as far as I can remember, wrenching my heart. I was going to read the book aloud to them, but sometimes it's better for them to listen to someone else read. And it was animated, and I think, oh my God, it's perfect. Hopefully, you have read The Giving Tree because it is a fabulous book. It is a story about a boy and a tree where they love each other very much. The boy comes to the tree and is sad, and the tree pretty much gives the boy whatever he wants. The boy ends up cutting down the tree, and it's actually very sad. Perfect for my lesson. We should only take the things we need or it could hurt the earth. Now, on YouTube, they love to put bra ads and slasher movie ads before children's videos. Nice job, YouTube. So I always put the videos on my Weebly because it removes the ads. I go grab the kids from Special, Jim I think it was, and we all meet on the carpet. They're all sitting, staring at me with their bright little eyes, and I remind them what we are learning about. A few of them interject, "We need water, we need clothes, we want tablets." Yes, you are all so smart. Now I tell them we have a movie to watch. They love movies, and they need to listen for the needs and wants in the story. I click play and immediately start cleaning, organizing, etc. In kindergarten, you get no downtime, so when you get them independently doing something, you have to take advantage. I'm across the room wiping a table full of glue and listening. They're all sitting perfect and watching the video. The story is going, there was a tree, and the boy loved the tree, and the tree loved the boy. The boy would swing on the branches and eat the apples, and they were happy. I'm on to the next table. This is how the book goes, and keeps going for about another minute. So I'm cleaning and listening. The boy came to the tree, and the boy was sad. The tree said, "What is wrong, boy?" And the boy said, "My house burned down and lost my whole family." And I stop and look up. This is not how the story goes. The kids are still listening and sitting perfectly, a huge accomplishment in K. I decide I should probably turn the video off. I start to walk to the front of the classroom. The tree said, "What can I do for you, boy?" Halfway to the computer. "Give me all your wood so I can build a new house." Click. My heart stopped. I slowly turned to the kids and said, "Friends, that was the wrong video." And the sweetest boy I've ever had looks up at me with literal tears in his eyes and he said, "Miss." Story 18. I work in a distribution warehouse. I've got all kinds of stories. The first one happened the week I started. Forklift driver forgot to let his forks down after dropping a pallet on the 3rd floor. Starts moving and hits the sprinkler system. $3 million in damages done, and the warehouse had to shut down for the evening to clean up. After that, barriers with bright yellow and orange streamers was hung up on both sides of exposed sprinklers to keep this from happening again. Story 2. I work in the shipping area. One of my guys was loading our main trailer by himself. He couldn't get the dock lock in place to keep the trailer from being pulled out, but since the light was set to red, he wasn't worried about it. Driver comes in, signs for a trailer, and goes back out without telling anyone. Hooks up to the wrong trailer and pulls it. This was the trailer my guy was on. My guy ends up with a concussion, cracked ribs, torn ligaments in the knee, a sprained wrist, and broken ankle. Last I heard, my employer, FedEx, and workers' comp were all arguing over who was paying for that mess. Story 3. Forklift driver 1 is going down the aisle, come towards a corner, starts to turn. Forklift driver 2 comes from the other way. On her phone, doesn't stop as safety regulations requires. T-bones driver, one hard enough. That driver one flies off her forklift, breaking the safety line that attached her to the forklift. She hits her head on the wall and blood is everywhere. Somehow, she isn't badly hurt, aside from a scratch on her forehead that took 3 stitches to fix. Story 4, like story 1. Driver puts stuff on 3rd floor, forgets to put his tines down, hits the safety guards I mentioned earlier, ripping them down, continues on to hit the sprinkler pipes. This time it does $4 million in damages, plus floods 6 offices. All the flooring had to be pulled up and replaced, along with the printers, computers, etc. that were in those offices. Story 19. Well, when I worked as a waitress, there was this guy who was allergic to mushrooms, so he ordered a bacon and egg omelet, and I put in a memo saying, "No mushrooms allergic." As if out of spite, the kitchen left 1 shred of mushroom in the guy's omelet. The guy had a reaction, but luckily it wasn't so bad that he needed to be hospitalized. I apologized profusely, but I'm sure he probably thinks I tried to hit him. Story 20. Not quite 10 years ago, I worked in a fabrication shop that did a lot of work for an international company that makes you think of feline pets. Got a huge contract to make part picking carts for them. These carts would go to the local parts hubs, which included the international headquarters, which were an hour away. They'd try them out, approve them for international use, or not. If not, it was back to the drawing board and we would make the corrections, then send more out again. I was second in command underneath a very capable dude who absolutely knew his crap. The rest of us, about a dozen, were good to go, and we start on fabbing this crap up. After we made about 400 of these carts, we learned that our management gave us the wrong ducking blueprints. Luckily, and after a handful of meetings with office management and putting our heads together, we figure out that we can swap part X and Z, fab another part, stick it where part L was after tearing part L out, and it's good to go. Under the gun, tons of OT. I made a ton of money during the ensuing 2 to 3 week period, though I worked a lot. We are about done fixing the 400 or so carts that have now clogged up our storage space and have sent a handful of trailers out to their destination an hour away. I can remember the moment clearly. The boss man walks in, owner's son-in-law, with a fresh set of blueprints in his hand and his face incredibly red, calls 3 of us into our shop office and explains that they, yet again, didn't give us the right prints. Multiple meetings again, and we find that we have to refab about 40% of these damn carts. Office management does their thing and decides that considering the work involved, we might as well start fresh. They try to order all the materials and it doesn't happen. Logistics chain completely craps out on us, and that's that. Because office managers couldn't figure out which print was which, they lost a multi-million-dollar contract with one of the world's biggest companies. This would have included carts sent back to us when they needed fixing/replaced, as well as provided the company with other opportunities. I left a few years ago when the layoffs started happening. The owner bought the local prestigious golf course and is now running that into the ground. The son-in-law and his wife bought the company off of the dad, and last I heard, there are 2 employees there besides the sword, and the place is OSHA's wet dream. All they had to do was figure out which prints were which. Over the course of about 3 months, the place went from, "We are going to be a multi-million-dollar a year company," to, We look like idiots and have pretty much lost it all. Still blows my mind. Story 21. Didn't see it, only heard about it. I work at a radio station. Apparently one of the board ops who worked here before me accidentally let some audio slip over the air from his computer. It happens all the time. No big deal. Unless you're watching adult film like this guy was. Story 22. New hire said, "Hi, nice tits," to a woman in the office he was just meeting. If that wasn't bad enough, the woman was his new boss who was trying to introduce herself to him. Story 23. I have a tame one since I work in it. I once witnessed a junior DBA apply a routine cleanup script meant for our testing environment in production and wiped out live active records during business hours. Needless to say, he was fired, but our deployment process was also necessarily overhauled. Story 24. My other half and I used to work together, it's how we met, at this small business. I was off on annual leave, so wasn't around when it happened, but my other half had hit his head pretty hard in the main office. He was throwing up the next morning and took the day off. The managers and boss were really uptight about people taking time off, so he felt under pressure to come in after just one day recovering. He was still dizzy and throwing up, but continued to do his job anyway as he felt like he had to, otherwise he'd lose it. They were great at firing people for no reason. He works in a warehouse and was dealing with a lot of big orders, but couldn't concentrate. So, obviously, he messed the orders up. The managers and boss decided he had a virus and it would pass in a few days. I realized he had a concussion and should take it easy. My manager was first aid trained, but somehow couldn't connect him hitting his head and being sick to a concussion. She was adamant it was that bloody virus, and he was totally fine. He kept going to his work out of fear of losing his job. He received multiple disciplinaries for duck-ups that he couldn't really control, and eventually, the one manager that was actually all right told him he needed to get signed off. She realized this the day he was swaying around the office and dragging part of his body around, as it would no longer cooperate with him. He got signed off, went for an MRI, and was diagnosed with MS that's so severe, he jumped right to the front of the queue for treatment. They have an accident book at this business. His accident still hasn't been noted, and he never received an apology from anyone in management for trying to claim he had a virus and pressure him into doing his job. They never even asked how he was for the 3 months he was signed off and then had a go at him when he came back to work. Story 25. Dude ordered a bunch of monitors and thought management wouldn't notice. I don't know what it was about this guy and monitors. Bruce was already kind of on a watch list after the company moved to a new location. There was a programmer on our team, Adrian, who just got a second monitor approved by HR. He was so happy with his new monitor, product running on one side, debugger on the other. Well, when we start unpacking our stuff, Adrian looks for his monitor and can't find it. TF. The software architect is going around asking people questions about Adrian's second monitor, and nobody knows anything. However, only Bruce appears uneasy at the questioning. Well, later on, Bruce was found to order 20 monitors for his department, in spite of the software architect's express wishes not to. That was the thing that got him fired. Personally, I didn't like him because he didn't like me. He called me that summer student and implied nepotism. I was the son of the graphic designer at that company, but what got me hired was friendship with the software architect, who's a family friend. He caught me playing solitaire once while I was waiting for D-Base to connect. Sure, yes, mea culpa. So he went to the HR to tattle on me. But Git also told HR that I was sleeping on the job, which I was absolutely not. So didn't like him. But does anyone remember the Dark Brotherhood questline from Oblivion where the one Khajiit keeps being an idiot to you the whole game, and then on the day, spoiler, when you receive orders to hit everyone, including him, he says something like, "Hey, look, I know we started off on the wrong foot, but I'm realizing you're not so bad. Let's turn over a new leaf." That didn't exactly happen, but I did see him after work, the day before he was caught for the monitors being picked up by his wife. Just the look of how happy he was running towards her, when all I've ever seen him be is a total idiot, and how he hugged her and his kid when they saw him. I thought, he can't be a total monster. So yeah, complicated feelings the day after that when he actually got fired. I felt a little bad for him. He's still an idiot though. Story 26. Working in the medical field, screw-ups can actually end someone's life. The worst screw-up I've seen is my own. I'm a paramedic. One shift I was attending to an elderly patient who had chest pain, had a significant cardiac history. At one point during my treatment, I asked my partner to draw me up some medics to give my patient for pain relief. The normal process with administering substances is that you must check the substances you are about to administer with another person, be it a doctor, nurse, or in my case, my paramedic partner. Even Panadol, quite the harmless substances in normal doses, you still have to check. I was distracted talking to my patient, and my partner just handed me a syringe with a morphine label on it. My immediate thought was, he didn't show me the ampule. I asked to see the ampule he had used, but he had already disposed of it. What should have happened? I should have discarded that syringe and requested another syringe of morphine be drawn up, but with it being checked properly first. I didn't, and so it came to be that I gave an elderly cardiac patient intravenous adrenaline. For the lay people out there, adrenaline makes your heart beat quite fast and hard. Not an ideal thing for someone whose heart is having a bit of trouble. His heart rate shot through the roof. He said, "I don't feel so good," and nearly passed out. Thankfully, I had only given a small amount, so the bad stuff was transient and everything went back to normal after about 30 seconds. The longest 30 seconds of my existence, during which my only words were to my partner, "Drive to hospital. Drive very fast." My patient lived, no complications or anything, but if I'd given him any more than I had, and I could have given a higher dose if I wanted to, my patient could well have gone into cardiac arrest. Story 27. I worked at a CNC machine shop for about a week, manufacturing various car parts. It just wasn't the job for me for various uninteresting reasons. But while I was there, it was my second day on the job. I was so frustrated because I clearly wasn't working fast enough, and the margin for error is terrifyingly small. It's a high-paced precision job. At the end of the day, I was beating myself up. I'm such a screw-up, I can't do this. I overheard a commotion next to crates of finished product. It was a manager losing his mind, walked over to see what was going on. A coworker of mine had spent the entire workday, 8 to 10 hours, manufacturing product upside down. Hundreds of thousands of dollars lost, material wasted that was now scrap, man-hour wasted, orders that could not be met. I felt so bad for the employee. Obviously, he screwed up, but it was more a management screw-up. Someone should have been supervising. The positive was, it gave me perspective of, I'm not screwing up that bad. Story 28. I worked in a mall, and a guy in an athletic store 2 places up saw a spider in the back room. He decided to take a shoe cleaning spray and try to lost it by setting the spider on fire. He kind of succeeded, but the spider still scurried away, under the shoe boxes, on fire. The guy realized he was probably going to be in trouble, so he just walked out of the back room and shut the door behind him. Yes, that was enough to close the mall and a number of stores. Story 29. Worked at a warehouse for a guy named Big Jerry, who was a legendary hard ass. When he left a Home Depot warehouse, he was so hated that his employees would camp out across the street and shoot pellet guns at his truck. Jerry opened the place up every morning at 4 and regularly pulled 15-hour days like it was nothing, running only on tobacco and contempt for mankind. One day, he's not at work for the first time in probably 5 years. We found out that Jerry's mother, the only person in this world for whom he feels something other than pure, unadulterated hatred, passed. He was back on Monday, and when he came back, a guy named Dwayne was starting. Dwayne had an attitude almost immediately like the job, the company, and all the workers were all below him. So, to take him down a few pegs, Jerry puts him on trash detail. Dwayne's response, unaware of the events of last week, was, "Man, I ain't taking no trash out. Tell your mama to take the trash out." It did not end well for Dwayne. Story 30. Ink used in large offset printers is thick, like toothpaste. For the most part, the main colors are black, yellow, magenta, and cyan. Some companies have special colors that they want to match perfectly and use premixed. Our company had a pallet of 5-gallon buckets of a special yellow delivered. They sat it next to paper rolls. They are shaped like toilet paper and stacked real high. Raised its clamp high to grab the top roll, and before it had a very good grip on it, turned to the side to aim for the exit of the storage area. The roll dropped right out and landed perfectly on the pallet loaded with yellow ink. The yellow exploded out under pressure, and years later, the area was still yellow. They cleaned all afternoon and gave up, and had to get an emergency order of the special mix delivered. The guy did not get fired, and because of the yellow color on the forklift, it was not noticeable on the vehicle, just on all the rolls, the walls, the floors, and him. They moved him to a different building that was a waypoint for shipping paper rolls alone. Story 31. A guy I worked with once wrote a 90-page manifesto as to why our employer was morally corrupt with a surefire plan to make us successful. Part of this plan included firing certain people, one of them being myself. Now writing the manifesto is in itself not a firing offense, right? But sending it directly to the CEO? Yep, they're going to find some way to fire him for that. Some way, somehow. And that's exactly what they did. Remember, folks, HR is not there to look after employees. The thing is, he ruined a good thing. He was put on an extended probation period after failing his original, and the management seemed to be too afraid to fire him for failing his probation, even though he was just so amazingly bad at his job. He could have had a long-term position, just bumbling away, but no. He had to go and screw it all up. Story 32. I was in the server room for a sub of Visa, and we had a co-owner, my boss, a contractor, and me standing at the control of the SQL server. I was being trained, self-taught, to manage the SQL server. The contractor wanted to wipe out a very small table so that it could be redone. He clicked on a few things and was about to click run. I jumped in and asked to see the script. Everyone said no, we don't have time, and they clicked run. He stepped away from the console, and I opened the script that was just run. I pointed to the part where it said to drop all the tables. I then said, that's why I wanted to double check the script before it was run. We had to ship out all the orders in 2 hours. All the tables were zapped, dropped, blanked, and the tape drive restore was several hours. After the restore, we'd have to re-enter all the day's orders and prep them. These were mission-critical shipments that have no choice but to go out that day. This was about egos. I was the guy learning from books. The contractor had a paper that said he knew what he was doing. All they needed to do was double-check. Some 10 seconds would have done it. They didn't want someone uncertified mucking up the process. This and a number of other ego-driven errors drove the business into bankruptcy, and they were scooped up at that last minute by Visa. The owners lost tons. The VP of marketing opened a competing business and is doing very well after taking a number of large key accounts. All this because of egos. Story 33. I work at a hardware store, and I primarily deliver construction supplies to construction sites, factories, schools, etc. Boss hires a new kid and has me teach him all the ropes. Kid just graduated high school last May, so boss was nervous about him, but also desperate. I teach him all the tips and tricks on Friday, show him the truck and how to use it, have him lift the slats off the truck bed and lift some of our heavier products so he can get a feel for them. On Monday, he drives the first 2 deliveries with my supervision, then we send him on his own for the next couple of deliveries. Seems to go fine. On Wednesday, I clock in and my boss asks me, "Hey, did you go with Trevor to apartment complex?" I said, "No, we sent him on his own on that one." My boss ushers me over and shows me an email from the apartment complex company with surveillance footage of the new guy running over the brick wall while exiting the front archway, knocking out some bricks, stop the truck, walk out, look at the damage, put his hands behind his head in the classic "oh crap" pose, get back in the truck, and leaves the scene. He left the scene of an accident, which we all know is a crime. So my boss calls him and asks him if he ran over the brick wall, and he denies it. So of course, my boss is like, "I have pictures of you, man." Hearing this, he finally admits it, and my boss affirms that it's not going to work out, and he'll have to be let go. Story 34. New patient admission to the unit. Nurse initiated all of these orders from the doctor and started treatment. Nursing 101. Always check the patient's armband to verify their identity. Sometimes the patient can't answer, but you still need to minimum look at name and birthday to make sure they match the computer. Nurse just started going to town and it wasn't the correct person. It ended up being some weird computer technically, like one number was off or something, but still, nothing dramatic happened. But some incorrect meds were given. Could have been really bad. Story 35, I work construction, so it's quite common to see screw-ups. However, the biggest screw-up was during the construction of a senior care building. The general contractors didn't give a crap about safety. There was an open elevator shaft without safety block-offs and an unfinished staircase. They didn't have any either. There were 2 fires on 2 different days, and to top it off, OSHA showed up to reap the harvest of violation. The site general was standing on the very top of a 10-foot ladder when OSHA walked in. They were slapped with around $20,000 in fines, and my company was one of the few on the job that had no fines. Story 36. I was working a summer job at a corner store in a small neighborhood on the outskirts of town. I was asked to train a new employee, about 20 years my senior, during a night shift. After about 6 p.m., there are very few customers. Perfect for quiet training of all the different systems in the small store. He starts coming up with ideas for how things should be run better. Like, we need to make a fresh pot of coffee for the customers. There are no customers this late, and they are not buying coffee. And make fresh cookies, and rearrange all the shelves, etc. I, chubby student, asked him, very large, kind of tweaked out 45-year-old, to stop, but he wouldn't. I told the manager why the store was so out of order the next morning and that I was sorry. The new employee was fired immediately. We suspect he also stole some cigarettes when I went to the bathroom. Story 37. Watched a guy destroy a brand new 3,500 Dodge with a forklift and 8,000 pounds of concrete. The pallet broke, dropped the wrapped concrete on the cab. I had to walk away because I was laughing my ass off. The guy got another brand new truck, thanks to Lowe's. Story 38. The biggest problem I can think of was actually one I made. I'm a welder, and when I was working in a small shop, sometimes if we didn't have things to weld, we'd help either the machining or shipping department. Well, usually when we helped the machining department, we'd just be operating the saw cutting materials to a rough length for the machinist. We only had one at the time to work with. Well, at this time, he had everything cut to length. He was working the mill and put me on the CNC machine. All I had to do was load the parts, then hit the go button. Well, I accidentally forgot to tighten down the vise on the CNC. Any machinist that reads this know what happened next. The head hit the piece, flung it, and proceeded to hit the vise, ruining the head that cost a couple grand. That was the head we needed, and we only had one. We were already behind on the project, and that didn't help. Needless to say, my supervisor and the president of the company were not happy. They really liked me though, and I worked for them before at a previous shop before they got their own going. So I didn't even get a talking to. They just kind of admitted I'm a welder, not machinist. And even though it was a simple task, I wasn't hired to run the CNC, I was hired to weld. I still felt really bad about it. Story 39. I was in the hospital a couple months ago for appendicitis. I thought I was sick at first, but it got really bad. Anyway, I go to our small local hospital and they tell me I have the stomach flu. They x-ray everywhere in my torso except my lower intestine. I was in the hospital for a week with a bag of saline keeping me alive. I could not hold any food or drink down. I ended up getting a stomach pumping tube from a doctor for no reason because I had no stomach acid anyway. And then I got sent to a bigger, more modern hospital after being on a ferry for 2 hours in an ambulance with a tube up my nose and down my throat for no reason. I get to the hospital and the first thing they ask is why I have the tube up my nose. Then they send me to get a CAT scan and they find out within 15 minutes of me being there that my appendix burst about a week earlier. Normal life expectancy with burst appendix is 2 to 3 days, I think. I had it for a week. Anyway, I had surgery the next morning after they pumped me up on antibiotics to keep me stable overnight. The bigger, nicer hospital filed an inspection on the smaller local one for almost killing me. Story 40. When I was a restaurant manager, one of our supervisors stuck a crayon, It went about as well as you'd expect. Total crap storm that quickly ended with the supervisor being fired. Having spent most of my life in the restaurant industry, I've seen a lot, but I honestly expect to never again see something that matches that level of impulsive stupidity. Story 41. My ex-husband used to run an auto service shop the first few years of our marriage. He and I had gone to high school together but didn't know each other then, despite belonging to overlapping circles. During his time running the shop, a guy from his high school clique applied and was happily hired. On his first day on the job, the schoolmate, who I will call Chad because I can't remember his name, and my ex started catching up and reminiscing about old times and old friends. My ex asked Chad if he remembered me. Tetragrethro, kind of thick girl. Yeah, I remember her. I should have dated her. She wanted to duck me so bad. Chad, being lost in the delusion that I was ever interested in him and in the memory of my high school assets, did not realize that the shop had gotten very quiet. These guys knew me. I was the one who brought in cookies, set up a spread for the Xmas parties, baked cakes for spouses' birthdays if the employee couldn't afford a gift, and sent in pizza if the shop was slammed. Most of all, these guys knew my ex's temper. Yeah, she's my wife now. He said Chad got very pale, then made a half-hearted joke about needing a new job now. My ex only smiled. Chad only lasted 2 more days. Story 42. We had a guy drag a 2004 Dodge Dakota to death behind a Mack truck. This was a few years ago. I had been tasked with fitting this little pickup with a tow bar because we had a relatively new fleet of Macks that we had to keep moving back and forth between our shop and a certified Mack shop about 15 minutes away for warranty work. The idea was that a single driver could take the pickup, grab a finished Mack, and drive them both back, in theory. So not long after installing the tow bar, one of our newer guys took the pickup to get a Mack. He hooked up the Dodge Dakota to the pintle hitch on the back of the Mack and headed back to the shop. But he left the pickup in first gear, so when he pulled into our yard, there was thick smoke rolling out of the engine compartment. The engine and transmission were toast. The push rods were jammed up through the valve covers. It was a mess. And that was the end of using tow bars on vehicles. Although the tow bar I built didn't fail, even under that stress test. Story 43. Last Monday, Tuesday, and Wednesday nights, I walked into the restaurant I work at and found the broken cooler being used to store product. About $5,000 of food sitting at 75 to 80 degrees. Every time, I fixed the problem and threw out the suspect food. Wednesday night, I got written up for theft and destruction of company property for throwing away food that could possibly have still been good. Thursday night, I put my notice in. I'm just praying no one dies. Literally, I can't stop them from doing this when I'm not there. And yes, if I go in again and it's like that, I'm refusing to use the product. They can send me home, fire me, or fix the situation. I honestly don't care which. I'm done. To add, yes, I reported to the health department. Considering I have reported vermin infestation, an orange mold growing in the ice bins along with maggots and grease traps and other things, and nothing was done save for a show inspection, they gave my store 2 weeks notice that there was a complaint and they were coming around to take a look. I don't have high hopes anything will come of this. Story 44. One time, I forget how many years ago now, we had a guy operating a self-propelled Elgin broom. It had this collection box on a hydraulic scissor lift to raise the box and then dump it into a truck or bin. For some reason, this guy forgot the collection box was raised in the air and tried to pull the broom into a maintenance shed. The sheds we use are all concrete, so he pulled the broom forward and just couldn't get the machine in. Then he flipped the broom around and tried to back it in. Same problem. So he finally got out of the cab and saw what was causing the problem. But now the chute won't go down because he damaged the hydraulics and bent the crap out of the collection box. So the guy did what any respectable employee would do in that situation. Left it sitting there, partially pulled into the shed with the destroyed box in the air, and went home for the weekend without telling anybody what happened. The result was going out to the shed and disassembling that section of the broom. Then hauling the broom and the pieces down to our shop so we could try to salvage as much as possible and then order whatever parts we couldn't. Story 45. This story actually comes from today. Background. We had several people out sick, so we were multitasking to cover for our missing people. We are also in the process of switching over to a new facility, so we have to do twice the amount of work. We are prepping labs for use at the new facility. I'm over at our new facility while my supervisor's finishing up at our current facility. I check my phone to read the text from my her. The first message I get is literally just duck. Before long, the texts start to just roll in. Apparently, she was making our diluted cleaning/disinfecting solution and had left our electronic Calibrated deionized water dispenser running as she went to get paperwork. When she came back to finish up, she found the electronic head portion of the system had fallen into the solution and shorted out. It now is completely bricked, and we have no clue if it can get fixed or not. Here's to the disaster we will be walking into on Monday. Story 46. I worked in a sign making shop one summer. We had a giant 4-foot by 12-foot vinyl on plastic order. Basically, a 1-inch thick slab of plastic was cut to size and had the vinyl adhesive applied to it. Think giant sticker. We had to custom order the plastic board from a local place that had the ability to cut such a large piece. Not the cheapest thing in the world. Then our primary banner printer was occupied for half the day printing this monstrosity. My supervisor, the shop grunt-in-chief, botched the vinyl application. This is not an easy process, attaching 48 square feet of vinyl adhesive to plastic. He screwed it up, wasting half a day's printing. Then, the grunt-in-chief managed to snap the 1-inch thick heavy-duty plastic board in half by tugging on the vinyl too hard while removing his botched work. Grunt's boss took one look at this and slowly went into his office and closed the door. A little while later, we were told to go home early. We'd try again tomorrow. Grunt-in-chief wasn't there for a few days. An unpaid vacation, as the boss put it. Story 47. Once while working retail, someone in the back room hit either the AC or sprinkler system with the forklift and caused the back room to flood. There was a good 2 feet of water. Rather than deal with it, the guy just clocked out and never came back. To make matters worse, management had a bunch of the sales floor employees in the back, pushing the water to either the drains or the loading doors because the special water-sucky cleaning machine couldn't handle that high of water. A few people didn't want to ruin their shoes, so they did it all barefoot. One poor girl found glass on the floor with her foot. So after that, we were pushing water and blood out of the door. Because people dipped out of this little event, it took the few people who did stay, myself, one maintenance man, and the super hot co-manager who wasn't even scheduled to work that day, 5 hours to clear up the back room. Super hot co-manager bought me new shoes afterwards. Also, same store, some guy got fired for buying beer on his paid break. Guess his plan was to store it in his car until after his shift, IDK. Story 48. A paramedic was driving an ambulance with his partner and a patient in the back to a local hospital code 1, no red lights or siren, one night. He was going at least 80 miles per hour in 55 zone. The road had just been widened to 4 lanes and was as smooth as it could be. Some lady was in the right lane and decided to do a U-turn right in front of him. The ambulance clipped the front of the car and, based on all accounts, continued down the road on the left tires for 20 or 30 yards before rolling onto its left side, sliding for another 50-plus yards. Sparks were flying, and at some point the gas cap was ripped off, igniting the rig. Everyone got out okay, but between the gas catching fire along with the oxygen cooking off, the unit and every single piece of equipment was destroyed. Aluminum spine boards, monitors, even the jaws of life were just melted down. Oh, the new road? It melted, and for years, whenever we drove over the resulting rough spot, we would remember that night. Both drivers were ticketed. The paramedic received some administrative action, but kept his job. Story 49. Friend worked in a small-town supermarket which had some dodgy electrics. They way you fixed a fuse switch out back. One day, the electrics are going a bit funny, so friend's supervisor asked him to go into the back and flick the switch. He goes to area where he knows it is and sees one massive switch and one small one. Assuming the massive one is the intended target, he turns it off. Wrong switch. The entire building's power goes off, and when he puts it back in the original position, it stays off. All the fridges broke, leading to all the food getting spoiled, and the electric doors didn't work. not to mention all the lights, Tilsect. For his sins, he had to stand outside for the several hours that the power was and explain to potential customers why they were closed. Story 50. A guy at work was on thin ice for several reasons. To keep it short, we'll just say our company thought it would be cheaper to rehab this guy rather than fire him for some egregious policy violation. Anyway, this guy needs this job. Imagine your worst case scenario where you just landed a dream job twice what you'd expect to make in a year, and you have nothing going in. He starts improving after a talking to, and everything seems to be on the upswing. Suddenly, he is nervous when he gets a phone call one morning. Comes over by me and starts saying he is worried he's going to be fired today. Why are you worried? I ask. He says, well, I might have harassed someone. Proceeds to tell a story about how he was just trying to build rapport with an attractive female employee and is fired later that day. Word on the street isn't specific, but says the harassment was pretty bad. Just work people. Story 51. I used to work at a corn maze with several other attractions. A mini maze, my job, a giant slide, a bounce pillow, a fishing pond. We were all teenagers. None of us really understood the bounce pillow. It was just always inflated when we got there. One day it wasn't. The guy who was stationed there thought he could figure it out himself. I heard it explode while I was getting my morning snow cone. The whole staff was replaced the next season. Story 52. A colleague was diluting very concentrated acid in a flask with some film covering it. Instead of swirling it to dilute first, he immediately began inverting the flask. Bad idea. Concentrated acid at the top of the solution melted through the film like butter and landed on his lab coat, which it ate through in about half a second before he got it off. Don't spill pH-1 acid on yourself, kids. Story 53. I worked at Enterprise Rent-A-Car, and my office rented Mercedes and Audis to the Mercedes-Audi dealership across the street. My boss and I were working one Saturday, and we forgot we left a Benz over in the dealership parking lot unlocked, with the keys above the visor. It got stolen that night, of course, and my boss tried to blame me for it and say that I did it on purpose to have it stolen. Ultimately, she was just embarrassed and didn't want to take responsibility for being careless. Her branch ended up eating the cost of the car, and our relationship was pretty sour from that point on, and I quit about 5 months later. Story 54. I'm a manager at a fast food place. I come in to open the store, and me and the other openers realize there's some kind of putrid smell. We walk back and there's alitive water on the floor. We open the freezer and realize the whole thing has been off since the previous night. We lost almost all of our food and have nothing to serve for the morning. I call my GM and he rushes to the store. He was still half asleep and starts blaming me. I remind him that I walked into this mess. He quickly apologizes and looks at the schedule to see who the closing manager was. I'll call him Greg. Well, he calls Greg and asks him if he knew anything about the freezer. He says he noticed it was starting to get warm before he left, but thought it would stay cool until we got a repairman. Well, we open the store and borrow stock from a surrounding store in our franchise. Greg gets called in with a meeting with our GM and area supervisor. Greg is promptly let go. Story 55. At the time I worked at the Pentagon, our boss had an inbox on his desk where we put stuff for him to take home and look at. Well, some idiot put a classified document in that pile. Not knowing it was there, the boss took it home, which is a major security violation. Could lose his clearance job over that. When he came in the next day, he was ducking pissed and totally tore a new a-hole out of the offending idiot. Then he went to the security office and self-reported the violation. Fortunately, he didn't end up losing his clearance over it. Story 56. I didn't work at this place, but was a front row spectator. Stopped into a Steak and Shake for some food with a few friends, and there was a family across from us, maybe halfway through eating. The dad was a pretty imposing, muscular dude, wearing a wife beater about 2 sizes too small. Enter a skinny, high school-age waiter, riddled with acne and a tray completely filled with drinks. He proceeds to trip and spill every single drink into the dad's lap. The guy shoots up in pure anger and stares the poor kid down. I honestly thought we were about to witness a brutal pounding. He silently grabs his wife by the hand and motions for his kids to get up and walk out without breaking eye contact with the waiter on their way out. Not a word was spoken by anyone. The obviously shaken up waiter then got on his knees and wiped up the spill. The restaurant was pretty quiet afterward for a good 5-ish minutes. Story 57. We had 2 massive dip cases of ice cream at the shop at the mall. The switch to turn off the lights was very stupidly located right next to the switch to turn off the freezer. Came in one morning to find all the ice cream in puddles in the dip case. My poor worker, who accidentally flipped the wrong switch, was beside herself. It was a mess to clean up, but luckily it ultimately cost us nothing because the company refunded us for the damaged ice cream. When was the moment you realized your workplace was toxic? Story 1. I had a job where my girlfriend's mother was my boss, so I guess the moment I realized my workplace was toxic was when my girlfriend cheated on me. And then my girlfriend's mom hired the guy she cheated on me with. In hindsight, probably more than just the workplace was toxic. Story 2. When someone was called into the manager's office, then returned to box up their desk and leave. When I asked the manager if she was okay, I was told, "We don't talk about people after they leave. If someone quit or was fired, they were just never mentioned again." It was creepy AF. Story 3. They fired a new father the day before Christmas Eve because he missed a month of work due to his wife getting very sick after giving birth. He didn't try to get medical leave or anything because he was worried about his wife and taking care of his newborn. Second one was when I sat in on a leadership meeting. I worked at the time as almost a bridge between two sides of the company, and all the leaders did was gossip about their employees and talk about who they wish they could get rid of and who annoyed them. One of them was a new leader, and they were friends with these people a month ago. The meeting was about how to improve morale on the floor, and the end result was a competition for a 25 gift card to the company's store that is nothing but company apparel that no one wants anyway. It didn't work. Story 4. Interned at a corporate firm. Scolded every day for small mistakes, even though it's known that I'm very fresh. Scolding never stopped and escalated to shouting. Superiors never once asked for my experience or feedback on their mentorship. At the end, was told that I'm just an intern, that I'm there for them to dump work on and to not expect to be nurtured. I had an internship at a firm, which if I performed well, and would be converted to a full-time offer. I'm a fresh grad and new to the industry too, so I'm eager to get the offer and learn about the industry. I get placed under this lady manager, who never really made the effort to get to know me on my first day. Whenever I tried to be funny or made the effort to get to know her, she would not reciprocate. I didn't think too much about it because she's very busy, and that's not everyone's style of working with someone. Fast forward a month in, I've just gone through 3.5 full weeks of being scolded every single day for minute mistakes. She has never once taught me how to do anything and has always focused on the flaws of my work. The reason why I focused on my time after a month is because that's the time when she started shouting at me. The company has an internal search engine. It's my second time using it. My first time was for another guy, not as senior as my boss, but equally wasn't nice, and he had placed filters for me. I didn't know they were on. I reported to my manager that I couldn't find anything, and she said, "That's impossible." I've spent hours at this point trying to find what she asked for, but it's just not there. So she tries herself, of course. She gets it. She starts making those grunting noises, those when you're super angry, but no words form yet, and shouts, "What the hell are you doing? It's one of two things right now. One, you just started 5 minutes ago and you're lying to me, or two, you have no idea what the hell you're supposed to do. Tell me, which is it?" I'm a somewhat sensitive guy, but I never try to cry in public. I just lose it. I felt so demoralized. Everything I've done for the past month was always wrong, and I've never had the opportunity to hone any of these skills because different work kept piling up and no one ever took the time to teach me. So anyways, she's scolding me still, and I don't know how to react because I'm a young adult now and I haven't been scolded in years. She didn't stop and never consoled me. I don't expect her to apologize because after all, it's my fault. But see, that's where it was toxic. I blame myself every day. I know I make mistakes, but every single one was called out and held over my neck. I got skinnier over my 3-month internship. I lost appetite and I could not eat. My mental strength was taking a hit every single day. I cried in front of my parents and looked so deflated that they started to get worried. My whole body was stiff. I went to see a doctor because of muscle strains, because of the mental stress. I've always been called the confident and chirpy guy, but I felt destroyed. I don't expect her to take full responsibility of my progress, but she doesn't take any at all, yet holds me a 100% responsible for my mistakes. Am I not bound to make mistakes when I'm new? Why didn't she teach me? Do managers really not have the patience to help someone? All of this was answered on my evaluation day. She said, "I don't think this job is really your interest because you've shown minimal growth." When I asked her what I could improve on, "You're an intern. You're only here because we need you to do work. Please don't expect me to nurture you." She never asked me about how I felt, my experiences, and never asked for feedback on the intern program. I was still expected to send in an updated resume, but I said, "Duck that," and yeeted myself out of there, despite it being a reputable company and a great starting salary. I was never respected, hence why I was never cared for. In a bit of an exaggeration, I was like a slave for them. I know that as an intern, I shouldn't expect 5-star treatment, but surely I can expect a little something, right? Currently, I'm still suffering from PTSD from making myself vulnerable to higher authority in fear of being mistreated, because that's what it was. Spoke to some people about this. My manager's an older lady and not married. She probably makes her job her life, hence the stress. I get it, but still would have liked at least something from her. Wasn't just her, though. Other people in the firm were impatient when talking to me, and most expected me to know everything. One time I was excited because I was called to another office. I thought I could participate in a meeting, but it turns out they needed someone to clean up the rooms and throw out trash for the whole day. Other employees were meant to help, but they all said to call the intern. I was the only one there that day, It's somewhat comforting, though crafty, to know that others have gone through similar work environment. Sorry for the rant and for maybe being a little ignorant to my own faults, but thank you for reading this because I needed an outlet to let this out. Thank you, OP, for starting this thread. My confidence has not recovered, and I lose appetite when I think about it too much. I guess with time, I will move on. I can't be like this forever. Story 5. One of my job's metrics for how our performance is graded by is on-time departure. We get so many points if we're within -10, -5, 0, 5, or 10 minutes from scheduled. People try to cheat by tampering with the clocks, and that's a punishable offense. I was good at leaving early or on time most of the times. Got a call one day to warn me that I was under investigation because I had the most points in the company. They assumed that I was cheating. That's when I knew I had to go. I wasn't going to start being late to avoid repercussions. Story 6. My parents sent a Halloween care package full of candy to my workplace, written to the care of Lilson flowers. Next time I was at work, I couldn't find the package. Later was told it was opened and all the candy had been eaten. Story 7. They kept promoting the stupidest mother duckers to management because they couldn't afford to move up actual Brighton, hardworking people who were performing the bulk of the work. Then they took hiring away from seasoned managers and offloaded it to some third-party hiring company that screened for quality new hires. Used to be that management would carefully go through resumes and do interviews with a lot of the people being referred from the current workforce. It was a tried and tested method and worked pretty well. And then, boom, the floodgates opened and it was all gets coming in. And not to be a total ass, but they targeted the crap out of people the business could get tax credits for in each state. I'm not complaining about out-of-work people. I'm talking about every incoming class having a handful of senior citizens that had never worked on a computer. I was standing in for a trainer one day, and this older lady smugly tells me she's not going to do X task because she doesn't know how, and she was hired for Y. When literally ducking everyone did it, I told her flat out to quit, but she failed out anyway. Then we got a new senior manager in that tried to have my supervisor fired, nearly succeeded, and when he moved, his entire job got dropped on me, which was fine because I found a way to just about automate half my work. B, no one else knew how to do my job, and C, there was no goddamn oversight of my job, which struck me as kind of illegal since it was a compliance position in a regulated industry. I kept getting these stupid projects assigned that I'd already solved for years prior, with management ignoring the suggestions where there were massive problems the company needed to fix. I had a laptop stand ordered for me because it had a space under it where you could only see that space if you were sitting at the desk leaned back, so only I could see down this corridor. Put on my headphones and listened to music while I worked. Nah, I binged Netflix all day every day. Oh, I almost forgot I hate yes people, and even worse, management that doesn't understand no, we can't do that. Got asked to do illegal things a couple times, not out of malice, just because they didn't realize the crap was illegal, and they were supervisors. How they got there without knowing these things is ridiculous. But we used to get a lot of situations where an idiot manager would be like, make X happen, and we'd say, we can't because of Y, with Y being some massive ducking obstacle that you'd have to be an idiot to not know about. One of my most hated corporate speak terms besides robust, best in class, and leverage is deliverables. Don't ducking promise some crap without knowing if it's possible. I had to sit down in too many meetings with people and explain that I never say no as an opinion. Eventually, I bailed because the problems that I had fixed on paper and would be easy to solve for a minimal cost had piled up high enough that I was afraid that it would fall on me, even with a paper trail over a decade long of supervisors ignoring crap. Bottom line, it's a rare large company anymore that stays a good place to work for a long time. New management comes in looking to make a splash and just ducks crap up sideways to have something on their resume as a win, then leapfrogs to the next company to duck up in search of a raise. Some of these places need rules that are kind of like the military. In order to do a certain level of job, you need X amount of years in a previous position and verify it somehow, some way. Get too many clowns that were a manager for 8 seconds and try to bounce to a higher position saying, I was at ABC Co. for 8 years and was a manager. Well, for how long were you actually in charge of anything? Story 8. Mine was when after being upskirted at work, my manager bought me black lace underwear and gave them to me for Christmas. In front of the entire team. At the staff do. It was tongue-in-cheek, insinuating it'd give a future one something to look at. I remember feeling humiliated and sickened, but having to try and save face. I felt like the incident was my fault. After that, I love my job and team and am happy to work in this field and will do anything for them shattered. My eyes opened to illegally long shifts, being underpaid, secretly getting us to cover, whilst he pretended to be in and paid us cash in hand, so the CEO wouldn't find out we only hire girls because it's good, being far more nefarious and also morally corrupt. More completely inappropriate workplace thing. I've thought for 5 years about coming out and talking about the company. It's somewhat well known in the UK. Past employees have said the same, and many are still recovering from it years after leaving. But I've always been too afraid, and I know too well that many people would still support despite things like this coming out. Story 9. When our boss got into a screaming match with one of the managers, his daughter, in the middle of the office. I just started there 3 weeks ago, and it was absolutely mind-boggling to watch. I looked around at my coworkers, and everyone was just looking away, doing their best to stay quiet and not look at either of them. Person at the desk next to mine saw my shocked face and whispered, "They do this a lot. Just ignore it." Story 10. When the line, "You're only as good as your last mistake," popped into my head, and I realized that explained everything about how I was treated in that toxic office. It didn't matter how many things I did well or effectively. One mistake and that's all anyone held on to. Also, I was hazed in my first year there, and when I tried to ask about addressing some of the office culture, the director shrugged and said, "That's just the name of College Way." Yes, this was a very prestigious higher ed institution. Story 11. We reached a point where we regularly had to wait to cash our paychecks. We basically were told we had to get orders completed and paid for in order for the account to have enough money to pay us. During this time, the boss went on a vacation, which was just great for morale. My manager had to take a day off, effectively putting me in charge for the day. I texted my manager, "What should I do if the IRS shows up?" 2 hours later, an IRS agent did stop in looking for my boss. I found a new job not long after. Story 12. I had a job as an industrial engineer that I really liked for 6 years. The guy who made it toxic wasn't even my boss. He was the operations manager of the building where I was domiciled, but I didn't report to him. When he started, my boss told him I was there to help him out with anything he needed. Well, a couple weeks into him working there, what he needed was for me to cover a Sunday shift that started at 6 a.m. The reason there was a need for a Sunday shift was because he attempted to handle almost twice the amount of volume that I told him was the max for a Saturday, and it went as poorly as expected, and called at midnight to let me know. When I didn't pick up because I was at my own engagement party, he went ahead and told his boss, and my boss, that I had agreed to come in at 6 the next morning. It was one of the dumbest things I ever did when I actually canceled all the plans I had with my family members who were in town and showed up. If I hadn't, there would have been about 50 employees waiting in the parking lot because nobody else had the keys, and people would have been pissed at me, but oh well. At the time, my bosses were putting me on software development projects and working on transitioning me into a software dev role. But within 6 months, I was supervising the operation from 9 a.m. to 9 p.m. MF and 6 p.m. to 6 a.m. Saturday nights, and I had been pulled from all my software projects. I quit to take a software engineering boot camp, and now I am a software engineer. Story 13. When a boss told me to go to the port to bribe the officials there to release several containers of materials for the hotel we were building. I did not, and neither did that chicken crap. Story 14. I started off training in kitchens when I was 14, started off washing dishes and doing desserts, and moved from there. When I was 16, a new hotel/restaurant was opening, so I interviewed for the commis chef position and got it. To start with, it was great. It was a husband, head chef, and wife, front of house manager, and I loved it slowly over a few months. My head chef's wife got more toxic. I cook a lot of Asian-style dishes as my preferred food to eat. When they were looking for menu ideas, I suggested a Thai curry that's incredibly easy to make, and the wife replied with, "We aren't looking for something out of a jar," and laughed. I went home that night and made a batch of the paste. The following day, I took the homemade paste and cooked the Thai curry in the kitchen, and the response was, "Oh, you made this." After she finished the plate, no praise or apology, which I was fine with, but then it ended up on the menu. I thought that would be it, scrutiny over, but then I noticed all of her little comments to everyone in the restaurant. Snide remarks as she sat on her phone with her feet up with front of house staff left in tears. Since she wasn't my boss, and at 16 years old, just trying to learn, I ignored what I was seeing and kept to myself as much as I could. A year in and a few shift changes later, I was working 14 days straight from 6 a.m. till 10 to 11. I was paid on split shifts but expected to work in between, with 2 days off and regularly called in on my days off. I, at the age of 17, asked if I could get a week off, the first time off I'd had in a year. And I was made to feel guilty about it by the head chef's wife. I was accused of wanting to abandon them, that I wasn't prioritizing work, but I pushed. And eventually I got 3 days off. When I came back, I was given my notice and sacked as I didn't have the commitment necessary, despite the fact that my head chef was in tears when he gave it to me, and she smirked next to him. I blamed myself entirely, and my last week of work was filled with snide comments from the wife, sad looks from the head chef, and being consoled by other members of staff as I kept blaming myself. Fast forward a couple years, and I bumped into the old kitchen porter. Once I left, apparently the restaurant turned into a crap show with the head chef arguing with his wife in front of staff members. until eventually the restaurant failed due to staff leaving in droves once I was sacked. Now as an adult, I know that it wasn't my fault. The environment itself was toxic, and in the long run, it got me out of the industry, and I'm much happier now. Story 15. My realization came late. I got laid off from a job with good pay and benefits, but I was dealing with long hours, high stress, a department with low morale, and a hands-off manager who seemed to care more about the company than me. Even though the place was toxic, I was sad to leave. I'd been there for years, and the job was in a field I know a lot about. A few days after the layoff, I attended an event not far from the building I worked in. When I saw the building, the first thought that popped into my head was, I'm glad I don't have to go back there tomorrow. Something somewhere, deep in my brain or my soul, had just told me that the job I'd just been fired from wasn't for me. Story 16. My wife works at a deli that mostly employs people that are either in high school or older retired people that are just bored and want something to do. The disparity of maturity creates a lot of workplace drama. I kid you not, there is some 18-year-old girl who works there with her mother. And if you cross this chick, she will tell her mom. My wife is also starting to get chewed out for things that her manager forgot to do, like ordering food. Story 17. When my partner was giving birth to our only child, I had spent weeks preparing to be gone for 2 weeks to be with her during and after birth, held many meetings, cross-trained, etc. I was a manager at a tech firm. I had accrued ample vacation time. My second day off, my partner goes into labor and we go to the hospital. During labor, the CEO called my cell repeatedly, and I finally answered and told him my partner was in labor and I was on vacation. He told me to open my computer and finish reports. These were reports that I had trained someone else to do, and actually others within the company were perfectly capable of doing. Because we were broke, yes, I was underpaid, I ended up doing reports in the hospital, took a short break during the birth, then went back to working until we were released. We had a couple of days with our newborn, but then I had to go back to work because my phone was blowing up. That week, I ended up working 6 a.m. to midnight, some days getting everyone caught back up while my partner was at home recovering from delivery and learning how to be a mom. Everything in me wanted to quit, but I knew we needed the next paycheck, and at that moment, I could not fight a legal challenge with my employer. They had me right where they wanted and made my life hell while my child just coming into this world. Never again. Story 18. When the union told me these are solid proofs of harassment, but unfortunately, the only way to win is to pay a lawyer and go on a trial against your bosses. And they are rich, well-known, and you are a foreigner. You have no chances, and all I can advise you is to quit. Story 19, worked in a psych hospital for a couple of years. This is a paraphrased conversation that one of our nurses had with the doctor about a patient that kept assaulting other patients and staff. The doctor only physically came to the facility 2 or 3 times a week. He literally did not give a crap. Nurse. Hello, doctor. The incredibly violent patient that we've all been complaining about for weeks just sent 2 of our staff members to the hospital. Pretty sure one of them has a broken hip. Can you please discharge this guy so we can have the police pick him up? No, just bring in more staff. If you call me and bother me about this again, I will keep him in the facility even longer. And just for this phone call, I'm canceling my rounds for the day. You can now deal with all of the patients getting pissed off. Good luck, don't bother me again. Nurse. Cool, thanks. We were not equipped or staffed to handle patients like this guy. He should never have been admitted to our facility, and this one just one such instance of this type of situation. The doctor would frequently admit patients like this that would stretch our staff to the absolute limit. The doctor knew and understood full well the impact it would have on the staff, and he just did not care. Story 20. When my boss sent me a Skype message asking why I wasn't producing as much work as I normally do, and that she knew I could do better. I was one of the best workers, never had negative feedback, and had always had great managers, bounced around to different offices before her. I walked straight to her office and told her to please never talk to me that way again, and explained that if she had looked closely at my numbers and compared them to my work schedule that morning, I arrived late, then she'd understand why I wasn't producing as much. From then on, it got worse. I found out no one liked her. It all came to a blow when I wanted a new job and was being considered after nailing the interview. My stupid self used my boss as a reference, thinking she'd tell the truth about how great of a worker I am. But she gave me a bad reference, and I was denied the job. I got a copy of what she wrote directly from her, and she wrote I didn't have much to say during meetings and that I used a lot of leave without pay. I was on FMLA for a short while, and the LWOP was less than 2 weeks throughout the year, which gave the impression I don't show for work much. I was so angry I contacted our regional director and had a 3-hour meeting with him and threatened a lawsuit. He said he'd help fix it by trying to get me into a better job in the agency, and he agreed. What she did was untrue and wrong. I asked him to have my boss contact the HR manager of the job. I was denied to explain that what she wrote was incorrect, and she did. I reapplied again for the job and was offered the position immediately without another interview. I started my new job back in April 2020 and just promoted in November. I'm so happy and relieved. Story 21. My very first job out of high school was as a cashier for a large local grocery chain. Every morning before my shift, my GF would kiss me as she dropped me off. No gross PDA or anything inappropriate, just a quick kiss goodbye. The first time she dropped me off, I was called into the manager's office before clocking in. When I walked in, the other employee I was training with was there. My manager looked at both of us and basically said that someone in the store complained that inappropriate behavior was going on in the store and making her other uncomfortable. She asked which one of us was the guilty party. We were both confused, but I said that my GF kissed me goodbye and asked if that's what the complaint was. She didn't answer me about who complained or what was actually described to her, but she said to make sure next time I was out of view of the other employees to avoid making anyone uncomfortable. I should have seen the toxic behavior right then and there, but I was young and intimidated and was still adjusting to a professional environment, so I didn't complain. Next day, GF walks me to the side of the building, away from the entrance and whatnot, and gives me a kiss and says goodbye. I walk inside and get ready to clock in, but I'm pulled into management again. She has an attitude and says, "What did I literally just tell you yesterday?" I was confused and said, "What, Dim?" She said that she got another anonymous complaint that I was engaging in inappropriate behavior, even after she told me to do it outside and out of view. I was a bit angry at this point and said that I did exactly what she asked and kissed her outside and wasn't even on the clock when both these events occurred. She was a little confused at this point, and I think she realized someone was lying to her, but nevertheless, she didn't apologize. The very next thing she said was, "Maybe it's just best for everyone if you just do that in your car so no one can see you and no one's uncomfortable." One of the worst jobs I've ever had, and I wish I had sued their asses off. Story 22. When they so clearly and blatantly stitched up the most honest, straightest guy because he was earning too much money. He was super efficient and really good at the job. Our team of 3, field-based, worked like clockwork, a well-oiled machine where we were allowed to police ourselves for the most part. Management never really had any dealings with us other than to collect paperwork on a Thursday. Well, they didn't like the fact that this lad earned a couple of dollars an hour more than us due to an agreement he made with the previous company owner. Myself and the third lad in the team didn't know, nor did we care when it all came out. Well, the bosses decided Jay needed to go in order to save money. They faked a break-in on his van, stole a bunch of stuff, and disciplined him for leaving valuable equipment locked in his van. Then, they tricked him into leaving his van at the office with the promise of installing a Mew alarm system. Instead, they ducked with the tracker, falsified the tracker printouts, and fired him for interfering with company property. It was as blatant as I've ever seen. More so because the lad they stitched up is the most honest person I've ever known. I once witnessed him buy a $1.30 washer in the suppliers for a small repair in his house, rather than take one from his van stock. That's the level of honesty I'm talking about. And we were meant to believe he interfered with his van tracker for absolutely no gain whatsoever. Myself and the third guy on our team left a couple of months later, and the company is now on its knees, having gone through at least 20 replacements in the last 18 months. Whether it's material, vehicles, or staff, they always take the cheap option and never learn from their colossal duck-ups, which happen time and time again. Story 23. Years ago, I worked at a fast food restaurant for the summer. My manager stole over $15,000 cash from the restaurant and then went on the run. Turns out, he'd been dealing heroin on the side. Had the police show up a couple times asking if he had come by at all. After that, my assistant manager was fired and sent to rehab for stealing money out of the register to feed her substances problem. My new boss had me spend half the time helping her to college work while manning the register grill. She then tried to get me to sleep with her friend, who also worked there, despite the fact that I was dating a girl at the time. She kept pushing me about it, and her friend kept making advances for a week. We also had an overweight employee who loved to eat in the middle of our shift. The owners of the fast food place also owned the ice cream parlor next door, and we could get free ice cream if we asked for the key. This girl felt she needed it so bad, she actually broke into the office and stole the key. When I went with my boss to investigate, we found her sitting on the floor of the parlor, eating straight out of the bucket of ice cream like a child. She was fired on the spot. On top of that, our best cook may or may not have been illegal, and when he was in a bad mood, he would intentionally sabotage/mess with the order's overcooked mozzarella sticks until they blew up, drop food on the floor, etc. He admitted to doing this often. I worked there for about 2 months before I took a look at it as a whole and realized how insanely toxic it was. The final straw was when my manager tried to claim she already paid me when she clearly didn't. I had to fight for my last paycheck before quitting. Story 24. My boss was toxic as hell, and pretty much everyone knew it but me. He was an awkward dude and super nice to me, So I always wrote off the fact that nearly everyone hated him as him just being awkward and rubbing them the wrong way. One year, our company was going through some changes, and his boss asked us to basically reimagine our team. But it seemed like everything we suggested was wrong. We'd sit down with my boss and discuss ideas, and it'd feel like a super productive discussion where everyone was on the same page, but then he'd go run it by his boss and always come back saying, no, he didn't go for that. And it was super frustrating for us because my boss's boss explicitly refused to tell us what he wanted. He insisted that he wanted us to come up with a direction on our own, but then he'd just block all of our ideas. We finally had a meeting where my boss's boss was actually there, and he could tell we were super frustrated. So afterward, he told us all he wanted to meet with each of us individually. And I went in there super angry at him and planning to vent, but we both realized very quickly that the reason for our difficulty was because my boss had been lying to both of us. We'd have those super productive meetings I mentioned earlier, but then my boss would ignore everything we said and then go present a vision that was basically what he thought would boost his career the most. And not only was this not what any of us wanted to do, it also had nothing to do with our team's responsibilities, nor did it have anything to do with our organization as a whole. It made zero sense, and that's why his boss kept turning him down. I don't want to give too many more details, but it would get real specific. But basically, he demoted a couple times and then pressured to leave the company. Hopefully that wasn't too confusing with all the my boss versus my boss's boss stuff. There needs to be a word for boss's boss. It'd be a lot easier. Story 25. They used the pandemic to cut bonuses, freeze salaries, and remove a majority of benefits. When we went public, they gave us virtually nothing. The CEOs and their cronies filled their pocket. A little history. We were acquired by this company and absorbed. Our old company was the absolute crap. Vegas-Barcelona trips, beers at lunch, sick company parties. We were one of the hottest companies in the biz. Everybody wanted to work for us. We had people planning to move from across the world to be in our office. They stripped all that away right when they hired us and installed a more corporate atmosphere. All the fun stuff was replaced with mandatory town halls where they preach community and passion and integrity. They then dropped a bomb on us. We're going public. During this time, they froze salaries and cut bonuses. The company went public and they didn't give the employees crap. Instead of being rewarded like we were promised, they rolled out the stingiest RSU plan I've ever seen. To make matters all worse, the CFO is an idiot. He calls women Koreans to their face and says the most derogatory crap when they're not around. The cherry on top is, we used to get $1,000 in cash as a holiday bonus. This year, we got hats with the company logo on it and a power bank, obviously from the swag closet. Story 26. A coworker of mine was falling behind on her duties, so I offered to finish the paperwork associated with all of the employees' sales. She had already done about 70% of the paperwork and I only had to do about 20 sales. Since it was my first time, I decided to go ahead and double-check the paperwork to confirm that every employee got the commission that they had earned. I discovered of the 36 sales she had filled out for the commissions, she used her employee ID number suspiciously high amount of times. I double-checked against our company's records and discovered that 19 of those commissions did not belong to her. Every error benefited her. Not a single sales commission accidentally went to anyone else. I took this information to my employer, spelled it out for him, and showed him the proof and explained that she was stealing from her coworkers. When she returned from lunch, he called her into the office and spoke with her, and then she spent the rest of the day avoiding me with this major resting Karen face, cutting her eyes at me every free chance she got, speaking in hushed tones with some of our coworkers. I was then called into my employer's office, and he told me that she said that this was simply a mistake and that she did not intentionally use her employee ID number to steal commissions. He then asked me if I was going to be a troublemaker. I did not say a thing about his decision. I merely nodded my head in faux agreement when he told me she made a clerical error 19 times, only in her favor. The next day, she approached me and told me I should have just brought this to her attention. I told her that it was our employer's decision not to punish her, which was his right because it was his private business. But she and I both knew that she was a thief stealing from not only myself, but several other of our coworkers, including single mothers working 3 jobs. I pretty much gave no ducks after that. Story 27. Within 5 minutes of my very first day at a car dealership, I was the new service cashier. A sales girl came over and said, "So, has Heather, new boss, said anything to you yet?" Confused, I said, "No." "About what?" She shook her head and said, "You'll see." Normally, I'd say take coworkers' opinions with a grain of salt as everyone is different, but turned out she was right. Think of the worst micromanager you can invent, then give her a massive chip on her shoulder, which she would attempt to transfer to you during every exchange, but particularly so in front of customers. Sadly, I met her male micromanaging twin in another position a few years later for an attorney. The attorney's clerk had arranged the interview, and after it ended, she called me up. "How was he?" A little off guard, I told her the attorney seemed professional, not an overly friendly type, to the point, but not mean either. A few days later, she called me back to offer the job. I agreed and she said, "Are you sure?" Ended up being the worst environment I'd ever been in. The attorney would literally yell and stomp his feet like an overgrown baby. The clerk would match his volume, shouting back before bawling at her desk when he left our space. Our jobs were mostly spent trying to keep each other okay emotionally by lobbing chocolates at each other. The work was fun and interesting, but you lose sight of that with that attorney's type of personality hovering around. I was basically told I was hired because of my name, because this prior clerks had shared the same name, and the attorney couldn't be bothered to learn a new one. Oh, and he was a chauvinist. I still think people need to form their own opinions of others, but if you hear comments that sits oddly with you, keep them in mind. Story 28. Someone in my department found a job posting on Craigslist for a photographer that we already had. We all immediately realized that the company was going to try and fire our current photographer, but not until they had secretly hired his replacement. Despicable. Anyway, the head of the department forced the HR lady to pull us all in a room and tell us a big stinking lie. The HR lady could barely keep the tears out of her eyes, as she was forced to compromise her morals. Everyone in that room knew it was a big lie, and that the head of the department was behind both of those awful decisions. At nearly the same time, the same head of the department called me early one morning when she knew I was alone in the office and asked me to go grab something off the printer and destroy it without looking at it. Turns out she had accidentally selected a work printer to print a chewing out email from one of her family members instead of the one at home. Well, I tried to not look at it, but I had to look enough to identify that it was hers and not someone else's. I saw enough to know that she was hated by her family. Ultimately, I and a few of my colleagues were fired on the same day because the same head of the department had been secretly reading all of our emails, and we'd been using email as a way of dealing with the stress of working for this horrible woman. I had said something mean about this sweater she wears all the time. That got me fired. Damn that place. Story 29. I'd been an employee at United Health Group for over 12 years. The company started to downsize my department. They didn't want to pay me the severance of $12,000, so they changed my boss to a hatchet woman. Every meeting I had with this Karen, I made sure a trusted coworker also attended. She tried to get out of this several times by stating that she would be talking to me about my pay or personal matters. I always said that I was fine with Jeff being a part of these conversations. I brought in a recording device. This happened in the days when pagers were popular, not cell phone. She tried to object to this as well, but couldn't argue against my rebuttal that I just wanted to make sure I remembered any of the tasks I was assigned in the meeting. I downloaded every email I sent/received to a USB device and printed out all of my yearly evaluations. All 12 of them stated, "Exceeds expectation." I taped these on the wall of my cubicle. I kept a notebook with me at all times, noting the date and time and summary of any conversation I had with this witch. Then came a time when she didn't come into work and hadn't been seen for days. Her boss asked me where she was. I responded it wasn't my turn to watch her. Turns out she was institutionalized after a failed diet attempt. Under other circumstances, I may have had sympathy for her, but she made my life such a living hell. I can honestly say that I wish she had been successful in her diet attempt. About a month later, I was laid off, and the a-hole company, United Health Group, paid me the full severance pay, but the check didn't arrive until 2 months after I was let go. Story 30. A couple of female coworkers went to the HR manager to file a complaint about sexism in the workplace related to the same guy. They got told by the HR manager and their boss that the company wasn't going to do anything about it because it would be very hurtful for this man to hear that his behavior was wrong. Later, when some anonymous surveys showed that employees were really not as happy as the company were claiming on social media, and people even felt discriminated against in the workplace, they brushed it under the carpet, saying people were just too stressed when they filled in the survey. Like, that is not a problem on its own. Many more of these kinds of things, but that's defo when I realized I had to get out. Story 31. I was hired as a graphic designer for a printing company to work alongside my CD and one other designer. On my first day there, the other designer I was supposed to work with had no call, no showed. The CD said, "This isn't like her at all, and she's never been late, but we'll figure it out." Except she wasn't just late. She never came in that day. It's like she was working and just got up and left. Her personal belongings were still all over her desk, including a fresh box of snacks and photos of her family and BF. Since her computer was the only one working that day, I had to take over her desk. Since it was also busy, they just let me use the missing designer's login info. I'm pretty sure there were some files still open from the previous day. After getting settled in a brief tour of the rundown warehouse office, I hopped on Facebook and typed in the missing designer's name to see if I could find a way of contacting her since she wasn't responding to any calls or texts. Not only did I find her profile, but she had made a post a few hours earlier saying she was finally free. She was so glad she escaped that hell. and it was the best day of her life. Even with the blatant red flag in my face, I stayed there for 6 more months and endured some of the craziest crap I've ever dealt with in a work environment. Story 32. I was in an employment a few years ago where my supervisor wanted me to put pressure on one of my direct reports. At the time, he never told me why. Might have been that she rebuffed in advance by him, or it could have been a staff reduction move. Either way, I declined. He insisted that I begin watching her coming and going times, lunch, breaks, utilization, etc. I half-asked her metrics. He got mad, threatened my next review. I wouldn't budge. I counseled her to just be careful on her times and told her, in my opinion, she'd done nothing wrong. Plus, her work was excellent. That's the day I drew my line in the sand. I wasn't going to be the data man to his hatchet job. I told her, look, this isn't right. We both know it. I've been here 13 years, you two. I updated my resume the night before our last talk and advised her to do the same. Later, about the time I left, I found out that she had a difference of professional opinion with my supervisor's pet. So he wanted to give her a hard time and maybe run her off. I took a new job, making 35% more. She had left a few weeks after I did and almost doubled her salary. She became my newest client at her new work. Story 33. It wasn't coworkers, but the customers. Gas station is the worst place I've ever worked at, even though the people living in there were like another family to me. I was having a shift on 24th December, 2019. After the dinner, everyone came in to get minimum amount of gas or to buy cigs. At one point, it got so bad that there were 3 cars standing at each gas stand, and there were 6 of these stands. So my coworker got mad, shut down the station, turned the slide doors to option of exit only, and proceeded to clean the floors while I was refilling the stand. People are such crapheads. These duckers that were standing outside of the gas stations were knocking on the windows. At one point when I was counting the cash in my register, I looked outside and saw at least 10 people knocking at the windows at the same time, demanding that we turn the pumps on. It really looked like a scene from some zombie apocalypse movie. We pretended like they weren't there, cleaned up the station, refilled everything, reopened at like 11 p.m. after we closed at 10:30 p.m., and I left at like 2 a.m. after the last customers left, while I was practically on an unplanned 4 hours overtime shift. When I came back home, my back was hurting and I was extremely tired. Before that, I came like 2 or 3 times home, and I just crumbled on the floor after 8-hour shifts that turned into 12-hour shifts out of nowhere. Please respect the cashiers at gas stations. You don't even know what kind of crap they have to put up with. Story 34. When I was given a promotion without a raise to a post that was not instead of but in addition to all my other tasks, and I already knew before I started it that there was 0 chance I would be able to fulfill that new role at all, because my manager would effectively block me at every turn. That role had already been held by a few other people for short periods of time before they got fired, and I knew it was basically an ejecting seat. I guess I should have twigged sooner because of the overall turnover rate of employees and the astonishing number of rage quits. I'm just really optimistic when I probably shouldn't be. Hell, the employees warning me not to take the job the day of my first interview should have been a red flag, but I appear to be quite a dunce. That way, story 35. My first job when my grandma died, and I asked if I could skip my 2 hours of OT since I was already ahead, and the remainder of the job was stuff that didn't need to be done until the next day, catering for a large event. My boss rolled her eyes and said, "Why does this have to happen to me? Whatever, I can't deal with this now," and went back to her office. I was so gobsmacked that I nearly threw my badge down and walked out. But instead, I stayed and worked the rest of my shift and my OT. 3 people saw this, and word traveled through the kitchen what happened, and the crew was fantastic to me for the rest of the night, which made my boss look as bad as she was. She didn't care what the crew thought of her, but she liked to look good in front of the casino's leadership and the tribe who owned the place, so it became very embarrassing for her when both management found out. She generally made life hell until I cracked and left the job. I wasn't the only one she pulled something like that on, but for a time I had the most heartless response from her. I lost that title though 7 months later when my lead's daughter was in a car accident and ended up in a coma. Boss went on a rant that her being there isn't going to wake the kid up. I need her here. When my lead heard what she had said, she quit. I left a month later. Story 36, my just barely former one, and yesterday upon transferring to another department and having a smooth onboarding, both today and yesterday, where people paid attention to make sure I had all of the tech, permissions, supplies, training, and understanding of the role to be able to hit the ground running. Previous job took 3 months to get tech sorted out. My direct superior was out for 7 days and no one onboarded me ever. They didn't even have formalized procedure. And having worked there for a year and a half, I moved into this new role, never having comfortably grasped my place and role in the larger context of the former. It was sink or swim, and I was never really taught to swim. Not that I needed to be handheld, I don't, but I was regularly left out on limb despite being told, I was going to be developed when I was coming in. As a young professional in a high-pressure field with only a few transitions so far, I've not had enough experience to realize that that was not normal. Better phrase, maybe it is certainly not all my fault, and that the burnout, self-doubt, disengagement, and ensuing failures that lead me to leave weren't on me. God damn it, I blamed myself, doubted myself, and my confidence tanked for a year and a half. 2 days into something new, I'm having an epiphany that it was management failure, and now I'm just irked at the largely wasted opportunity of my previous role. Story 37. I once got asked if I wanted a different position away from coding into project management. I said, okay, if you help me set it up and give some guidance. The next week, I got a project through a binder being placed on my desk and the words, "This is your project, good luck." Before I could react, they were out the door. I had a hard time getting projects started, worked on common sense and some help from coworkers taking pity on me. I made a checklist for software deployments, for instance, but when I told in a rare department meeting that I made such a checklist, I was told sternly not to waste time on stuff I couldn't charge customers with. After the confusing meeting, several coworkers asked me for a copy of the useful list. It still took me some 2 years of working 60+ hours a week to make my way out the door, and got a 65% raise starting the next job.